Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
I'd like to turn the program over to my friend Joe.
It doesn't matter. Joe S. My name is Joe Sostridge, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hello.
You can't hear me? They always say you're the lucky ones. Wait a minute. Now hear this. The smoking lamp is lit. Okay. Well, I've always wanted to be like one of the big guys so that you could see me as well as hear me. And one day I had the courage to wear my son's shoes with big heels, really big. And I really felt good. You know, I was tilted a little, but I walked into the office, and the first person who saw me said, "When did you get the orthopedic shoes?" And so I never wore them again. That was all of it. But Carter had told Dick to be on the lookout for a short fellow with elevator shoes, because we had never met each other. And so while everybody was milling around the airport, and Doris was looking for two people with butterfly emblems on them, and Dick had his group looking at everybody's feet. And they were staring at everyone and saying, "Has he got elevator shoes on?" And you know, that was a weird group, looking for butterflies and feet. Now, if you think that wasn't a group who needed a meeting. Now, I've talked with Dick, and I can tell you this. He's a guy who really works his program. And he does it with height, dignity, and without elevator shoes. So I now give you Dick D. from Denver, Colorado.
Thanks, Joe. That just points or illustrates how sick I am, walking around an airport, looking at people's feet. Before I introduce myself, I would like to thank the committee for a very wonderful weekend. Me and my wife really needed this weekend to get away, and it's been very enjoyable. I would like to introduce my wife. She's a very important part of my story. Janie, would you? It is. Janie, can I get you to stand up? What the hell with the mic? Janie was a result of a successful 13-step. I don't know if you have 13-steppers in the Louisville area or wherever you're from, but the old-timers at York Street told us, the new guys, you don't mess with the new gals. And consequently, the old-timers had all the gals. So I left the York Street Club and went up to the north area of the city to a group called Mountain View, and that's where we met. She's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous.
It's the wire. The round thing on the bottom. That's all here.
Is it all right now? Okay. If you folks have read your first grade reader and you read about Dick and Jane and Spot and Puff, see how they run? Well, I wish our story paralleled that. It doesn't. It probably would go more along the lines of Fun with Dick and Jane, the movie of the bank robber and so forth. I'm Dick. I'm an alcoholic. I come to you from the Vitality Group in Denver, Colorado. I came to you people the 28th of April, 1973. I came to you dirty. I came to you hungry. I came to you to you people thirsty, unloved, unwelcomed, and I was dead. Spiritually and mentally, I was dead. And what you people done for me in the last 9 years is you've cleaned me up just immensely. You've put, I've let God in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous clean me up on the inside. You've quenched my thirst, you fed me, and you restored me to sanity, but probably the most important thing of all, you put God in my life. And prior to coming into the program, He didn't exist. He had it one time as a child, but He had completely left me by the time I got to you people. I think it's very important to point out that my thinker broke before my drinker. I was screwed up from the very beginning. I would like to stand here tonight and say that my alcoholism is a result of my parents, who were both alcoholic. I would like to tell you that I am an alcoholic because I was an only child. I'd like to tell you that I'm an alcoholic because I'm a Sagittarian. But I'd like to tell you that the reason I'm an alcoholic is because of God. And they're working on this hereditary thing, particularly at the University of Colorado, and I think real soon they're going to probably come out with an announcement. But I ain't going to buy it until it comes. I feel that I bought my disease. And I know of only 2 diseases you could buy. One is alcoholism and the other is VD. And I caught VD free many a time. So that eliminates that. And in the process of buying my disease, it cost me dearly, like it has all of us in this room. It cost me a wife and damn near my life. But when I got to you people and I looked at the symptoms in the big book of alcoholism, I had at an early age. I had fear and resentment and anger and terror and bewilderment. And God, I was sensitive, and I never seemed to fit. I just never... And I had these feelings from the time that I can remember, possibly at kindergarten. So with these feelings and growing up in an alcoholic home, being an only child, at the age of 14, I was in junior high. We saved our lunch money one day, and we went out on a street called Colfax, which runs east and west through the city of Denver. I've talked to some people here, and possibly it's I could compare it to Jefferson Street in Louisville. It's a street where all the action was at. I lived a few blocks from the state capitol, and the servicemen hung on East Colfax because of the strip joints and all the beer joints. And we saved our lunch money one day, me and 2 other fellows, and we got a flyboy. There was an air base, a large air base in our town, and we got this flyboy to get us some wine. And I could really identify with Val today because I'm a wino. And it's the first thing I ever drank, and it was white port, and we mixed it with lemon juice, WPLJ. And in the mid-50s, to set the scene, rhythm of blues were in, and it was such a popular drink, some group came out and put out a song, WPLJ. And we went to a park in the neighborhood, and you mixed the two, and it was a real smooth drink if you got the mixture right. And what happened that afternoon, me and these other 2 fellows, and by the way, these guys had the same feelings as I had. I speak at a lot of high schools at home, and the jocks run together, and the druggers run together, and the juicers run together. And so these 2 guys had the same tendencies as I had, but they didn't quite enjoy the wine like I did. From the very first time this wine touched my mouth, it fixed me. Now, I can really identify with the drug addict who goes to his pusher to get fixed, because what that wine did that afternoon, it fixed all those fears, all that anger, resentment, all that terror, and it made me all right for the first time in my life. And I can truthfully stand here before you tonight and say, thank God for alcohol. I don't know what the hell I would have done without it. The drug scene hadn't hit town yet. The Mexicans were smoking a little grass on the west side. But in my neighborhood, the nose inhalers were coming into play, and that was 99% Benzedrine, and I got into a little bit of that. But I felt very fortunate growing up in the 50s that the drug scene hadn't hit, because I'd have gone into it too. But what we did that afternoon after drinking the wine, we went roller skating, because it seemed like everybody in the 50s in Denver was roller skating. And it made me skate better than I'd ever skated in my life. I was the guy that went from wall to wall and fell down in the process. But that night I just skated smooth as could be. I thought, and that's why we drank, it made me function. It made me think that I was doing all right. A little later that evening, I made a move on a gal that I had been wanting to for years. At the age of 14, I was as tall as I am now, but I was skinny, and I blushed at anything. And I was terrified of women. And under the influence, I made a move on this little gal, and that was neat. A boyfriend of hers took exception. I had never won a fight in my life up to this. I didn't like to fight. But under the influence, I won my first fight. And that was neat. And then somewhere along the line, I blacked out and I passed out. And basically, that's the way I drank the rest of my drinking time. I should point out that I feel, and I'll try to tie this together with the 4-step, I feel that from that day on I quit growing, mentally and spiritually. And I'll try to tell you how this happened. So up to that point, I was a star scout in a troop, very active in Boy Scouts. I was the guy that the only thing I did well in school was play sports. I wasn't much at the scholastic field, and I was a dreamer and fantasized a lot, and spent many an afternoon thinking of carrying the football in a Rose Bowl game or shooting that final basket at the NCAA tournament. And I went to Mass on a regular basis in confession, and I went to camp, and I did most of the things that the other teenage kids were doing. But from that day on, that part of my life quit. I can't remember going to Mass much more after that. The Boy Scout troop disappeared, and I didn't shoot baskets quite as much as I did. And I started running with an older crowd, and I just drank on weekends, and drank just most of my life on weekends. But I was off and running. And it was just a short time later that I found myself in a high school, the best high school in town as far as sports and scholastic. And it was a school where you had a mixture of the rich kids. All the rich kids in East Denver went. And I, growing up on East Colfax in the Capitol Hill area, we were considered poor. But it didn't bother me that much. And because of my athletic ability, it opened some doors for me when I got to this high school. And I made the football team as a sophomore. And I'll never forget, I went and played my first game, and after the game I was invited to a party that I normally wouldn't have been invited to. And they were drinking, of course, and somewhere during the evening I got drunk and blacked out. And from this point on, I share with you, came out of a police record. I don't remember, but apparently they'd run on alcohol. And me and two other kids got in a car and went out to get some booze at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And we broke into a drugstore. And we got $200 worth of possibly, I don't know how many cases of Coors beer and some wine, and didn't even think of the drugs. And took it back to the party, and apparently partied the rest of the weekend. Did not realize the severity of the crime. Well, when you're blacked out, you don't even know what you're doing. But the police department didn't think too highly of it and was waiting for us at the high school on Monday morning. And of course I was hungover, and still it was a big alarm. Went back to the high school, and it was kind of embarrassing to be drug out in front of the student body, but I found myself in a police station being charged with a criminal offense, a felony, a burglary. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know anything about justice. I just thought that the courts were fair. Well, it just so happened the two kids that I were with were from wealthy families. One kid's father was a doctor, and the other kid's father was a leading advertising exec. And I don't think they spent an hour in jail. And they were walking the streets. And I didn't understand this at this age. I thought that lady that holds the scale in front of the Supreme Court, there's justice. And I tried to explain to the detectives that I don't remember doing this crime. And apparently in the 50s there wasn't the awareness that there is today on teenage alcoholism. And they didn't believe me, and they filed on this charge, and within 90 days I was before a judge going to a state reformatory. And I didn't understand this. My folks were rather poor, and I had no legal... I didn't think they were going to send me away first time. And I went to a state reformatory, and I think I shared with you I've never fit anywhere. And I sure as heck didn't fit in this situation. And I'll never forget my first night in this reformatory. I cried. And I don't know if it was out of homesick or desperation or despair or whatever it was, but an older kid grabbed me in the morning, and he says, "You don't cry in a place like this." And I shut off an emotion. I never cried again until I took a fifth step. It was a sign of weakness, and you know what can happen in a reformatory or penitentiary. If they think you're weak, they'll take advantage of you. And I didn't understand that at the time either, but I changed. And to this day, I do not feel that I'm a criminal. Never have felt like I was a criminal, but if you were to look at my jacket, it would sure tell you something different. I was fortunate down there. I've always been assigned, I don't care if it was a penitentiary, a work farm, wherever, I must look like a cook or a baker. I've always gotten in the kitchen. And that has its advantages. And the only reason I point this out is that you can get high and get drunk as a skunk in an institution. And what my job would normally be was to get the yeast or the lemon extract or whatever. And I never could understand why those screws didn't know what was going on, because the bread wouldn't rise. And when the population came into the chow hall and the bread was flat, they knew there was a batch being made. And as a result of that, I would get a quart jar, a mason jar of whatever, prune jack, apple jack, you name it, peach brandy, and it was bad. But it got the job done. And I went through this term in this reformatory and was released with a parole that J.C. would have had trouble doing. It was an agreement that you couldn't have a car, you couldn't have a girl, you couldn't have nothing. And you signed your life away to the state. And it was just a short time later that we were driving on East Colfax, trying to be tough and trying to be something. And I happened to be with two other felons. Now, I don't fit back into the high school crowd. Those days, that 9-month stretch in the reformatory, I did return to the neighborhood sort of a hero, but I sure didn't fit back at school. So consequently, I am now going to go with guys that I had been in the joint with. And they had a thing, I think it's since been proven unconstitutional, but they had an agreement there. They called it, what was it, if you were caught with another known felon? But they could violate you because they thought if there was more than one felon together, you were plotting. And we were driving East Colfax, trying to pick up chicks, drinking Coors beer at 17 and trying to be somebody, and we ran a light. And when they run a make on the three of us, it was just within a week's time we were back in the state reformatory on violation. And this time back now, I am really bitter. And I am going to become a criminal because to be tough in the yard, you've got to at least talk a pretty good game. And I did this time, and I go to the penitentiary on a regular basis now with Alcoholics Anonymous, and they're still doing the same thing. Everybody's a pimp, and everybody had this and that, and they're just talking a game is all they're doing. But I learned how to survive is what it really amounted to. And the second time back, I'm just going to do the heck with it. I've got 2 drunks now, and they're going to end up costing me about 5 years of my life. And it got out of hand, and a full-scale riot broke out. And a dear friend of mine who was just a few feet away from me got blown away. And in the process, I got hit by the warden. He was going to break this riot up. He didn't realize it had gotten out of hand, and instead of calling the National Guard or something, he came into a cell house with 238s and just started shooting. And he panicked, and he caught me in the back, and it ricocheted 8 or 9 times through me, and I laid there and by all practical purposes was supposed to die. But they got me out of there to a little railroad town in Salida, which is down the road 20 miles from Buena Vista. And there happened to be a doctor there who had gone through 2 world wars, First World War and the Second World War. And he more or less knew exactly what to do with my type of gunshot wound. Now, we were drinking that afternoon of this riot, too, by the way. And I'll never forget getting to that hospital, and the doctor said, I don't know what we're going to do. They were giving me morphine, but I could still hear the talking in the background. Well, thank God, because of this man's experience, I lived through it. And in my recovery there, I spent almost a year in this hospital. There was a man in Leadville who is now the Archbishop of the Episcopal Church in our home state. And he had a little church, and apparently on my record at the reformatory, they had me down as Episcopalian. He came on a regular basis 2 to 3 times a week to visit me at this hospital, and we read from the Bible, and he shared with me. And I'll never forget, it was time for me to go to the penitentiary now. The other 50-some-odd guys had already gone down to the big house. And I am 18 years old, and the day that they were removing me from the hospital in shackles, the priest or this Episcopal minister was there. And he asked the 2 guards if they would leave, and he said, Dick, he says, you were supposed to die. The odds were 40 to 60 against you or something. But God spared your life, and someday maybe you're going to have the opportunity to realize the reason why he did. And that has happened. I have talked at a school assembly where a feeling came over me, a spiritual experience or awakening, whatever, and I knew this was what it was all about. This is what that man had shared with me. I went down to this penitentiary, and you talk about terror. An 18-year-old kid. Now I'm with the big guys now. There's no more playing around. My very first day in the yard, I seen a man killed. I should point out that I had many people try to help me. While I was in this reformatory, we had a tremendous basketball team, and this is basketball country down here. I was offered a scholarship. We didn't play many road games. We were always the home team, but 6 or 8 of the little colleges in the area would come in with their freshman team, and we would usually wax them. And there's a school up at Fort Collins called Colorado State University. It's as big as our state university. And I was told that when I got out of there, don't forget about high school. They give me a test and give me a free ride to play basketball because I could play some ball. But the self-confidence and self-esteem wasn't there, and I just didn't think I could fit. But I played basketball at the penitentiary and football, and some offers came there also. We were always the home team, but we would play 6 or 8 football games against the freshman teams from CU and CSU and Adams State and Western State. And I had an opportunity there also. But finally, we filed a writ of habeas corpus. We found out that through the law books, they had a library there. And now I'm using a little bit of drugs in the penitentiary. In the wintertime, there's more drugs in our state penitentiary than there are in the streets. That's a fact. And I've smoked a little grass by this time, but still I'm a juicer, not a junkie. And we filed a writ, and through a technicality, they had to release us. And I knew that I could not parole to Denver and make it, because all I All I know now is felons. I should point out that AA was offered in this penitentiary. They announced one night that there was a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, AA they called it. And I asked the guy in the cell next to me, what in the hell is AA? He said, that's where the winos go. And I didn't see too many doors opening to get out. So I thought, I'll just skip that. It's bad enough being up here as a convict, and I don't want to be known in the yard also as a wino. So I didn't go, and I wouldn't have been ready for it then at the time anyway. So I paroled to an uncle in California who, by of all things, is a sheriff, deputy sheriff, and he is the chauffeur for Gene Biscuits, who was the sheriff of Los Angeles County. And I think my uncle's got a captain's rank, and it looked good for the parole board. And now this uncle I haven't seen in 20 years, and now he introduces me to everything that I haven't been introduced to this point. The very first day of being released and getting off of an airplane in California, we go to Santa Anita Racetrack. And I won $800, which was beginner's luck, and now I'm off and running. I qualify for most self-help programs. GA, NA, I'm not an overeater, but I got locked into the gambling, and I'm not going to waste your time or my time talking about my gambling problem. But I was off and running and gambling. And then he was taking bennies, and I found out that if you mix that with alcohol, you can just drink so much more. And I loved it. Within 90 days in California, I found myself working on a back lot in a studio with a movie with Elvis Presley. Here I went from the penitentiary into a totally unreal Tinseltown world, and I thought I fit at last. And I did this work for 6 years. And I drugged and I drank and I drove in the fast lane, and I loved it. It was neat, and I thought I finally found where it's all at. Well, the drinking progressively got worse. I took on a wife and more responsibility. The studio work was going dead. I worked at the Bat Masterson show for 3 years. I don't know if anybody remembers Gene Barry and the Bat Masterson show, but if you saw a crooked picture or any kind of a screw-up, it was probably a result of my alcoholism. But I got out of that field of work and was trying to function to the best of my ability. And the alcoholism is getting worse. I found time to get 4 502s out there, which is drunk driving. I did a year on the Wayside Honor Farm. And I just couldn't get my act together. But I should point out, my problem was that I would stop to have a couple of beers. That's all I really wanted to have, was to have 2 beers, talk about women and sports, and shoot a game of pool, and go home like the rest of those people did. And I would go a week, 10 days, without a couple of beers, and I would stop. I'd have tickets maybe to a Dodger game, or a promise to go to the beach. And my intentions were well meant. But I would stop to have those couple of beers, and you know what would happen. I could end up in Mexico, I could end up in Arizona. Primarily it would be Tijuana. And I have been at times, I woke up one time, and I'll never forget this, about 500 miles into the interior of Mexico, and 3 days passed. And I thought, now what the hell do I tell her this time? And I drank for possibly another day or two, and I thought one of the greatest excuses ever put together. I called this ex-wife in Los Angeles, and I said, don't give them the ransom. I've escaped. And it went over like a dud. I just heard a click at the other end. I would set her up. God bless her. I would go out on a drunk, or I would go over to Gardena and get into the card games because of my gambling addiction. And I would blow a paycheck. And I found out early that if you mail your wallet, the Postal Service will return your wallet. Well, I would be broke, and I'd return home. And I'd say, it's not the money I spend, it's the pictures, the driver's license. And I would set her up beautifully. knowing that that wallet was coming, and it would come 3 or 4 days later, and she would come in happy. You got your wallet back. And I did that 10 or 12 times. And she fell for it every time. Finally, what happened, 2 guys had escaped from the penitentiary in a city of 7 million people. I'm drinking, working in a packing house, and I'm drinking in a bar at 8 o'clock in the morning, and these 2 guys appear from out of my past, and we start drinking, and I lend them my car, they take me home, and they kill a couple of people in a busy intersection and left the scene, and the police came to the house, and I'm facing a homicide charge, and I can't snitch. I cannot tell the police that these 2 guys did it. Fortunately, a detective put 2 and 2 together, and one of the guys that had escaped went to the L.A. County Hospital for some medical attention that night, and they released me. I went back to work, and it cost me a couple $1,000 for funeral expenses, and I got the license back. Everything's going to be all right. And then the guy the family files a large lawsuit, and I got an attorney, and he says they're going to collect. And I said, well, what do I do? And he says, you leave the state. You don't tell anybody. You just pack up and you go back to wherever you're from. And you stay gone for 7 years. And I went home and I broke the news to a wife and 3 children. And she's from Mexico and doesn't know what snow is like. And her family's there. And we relocate. And we go back to Denver, and I'm going to start all over again. I'm going to change. And I got a good job with a grocery outfit there in town, and I tried coaching Little League football and sports, and tried to be a Cub master. And I would do well, and then I would stop to have a couple of beers. So I would try to wash a car, and I would go over and get a 6-pack to have a couple of beers to wash the car, and then I would disappear. And I would get in more damn trouble than the guy that drank on a regular basis. And I am just a periodic. I can more or less take it or leave it. But I can't understand why I can't have 2 drinks. Finally, this gal must have went to some element, because she finally confronted me after a 12-year marriage, 3 children, had a new home, new car. On the surface, it appeared that I really had my act together. And she said, you drink like an alcoholic. And I didn't realize the built-in alibi system. I said, I don't drink as bad as so-and-so, and I didn't. And she bought into it. And I have never lost a job over alcohol because of my drinking. And I had lost numerous jobs. But it was always a result of something else, attendance records, or maybe punching out a foreman, or an act of violence, or whatever. And I convinced her I wasn't. She said, okay, the next time you get drunk, you're out the door. Well, it was the next day, because by this time, I can't stop. It is progressively getting worse. And I'm at work one day, and the phone rings, and it's attorney, and she's in his office filing, and they wanted to know how soon I could be out of this home. Now, I have had this kind of action thrown at me on numerous occasions, and I just know that I can go back and convince her. But this time she had it. And I come home one night, and there was the golf clubs and the bowling ball, and my life's possessions were on the front porch. I got a sleeping room up in the Capitol Hill area, and within 90 days, I lost my job. And then the real alcoholic showed up. I threw everything in my car, and of all places to return to, I go back to Los Angeles with a stop at Vegas and hid some money and went to Los Angeles. And what would happen, I would hit a town, and I would get a job, I'd get a room, I'd get on my feet, and I'd get it all together, and then I'd stop for a couple of beers, and then San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, and I ran for a year. And I'm on my way back to Denver, and I stop in a Holiday Inn in Albuquerque. I've never seen things or heard things to this point. And I got into this hotel and checked in and got up to the room. And my oldest boy's name is Danny. And I named him after Dan Daly, the actor. because I had worked a show with him. And I heard on this piped-in music, they kept playing this song, Danny Boy, and I loved the song anyway. But it played for about an hour, and I picked up the phone and I called the desk and I said, would you please turn this music off? And they said, well, Mr. Daly, we don't have piped-in music. And I thought, uh-oh. And it was a short time, within 10 or 15 minutes, I'm sure it was maybe shorter, a couple of leprechauns appeared under the door. And I chased these little guys for several hours, and out of exhaustion, I passed out and got on the road the next morning and terrified, scared to death, because I had seen the guys in the city jail that were seeing the spiders and these things, but it never happened to me. And there it was. And I got into town, and by this time my folks' alcoholism had progressed. They didn't want to see me. And within a week or two, I found myself down on Skid Row. This isn't very uncommon in Alcoholics Anonymous. I find that it is uncommon in your hometown. You normally don't end up down there. You know what? I didn't fit there. Most of the people on Skid Row are not alcoholic. And I'll illustrate a point how I found this out. I call it Someday Street, because I just knew someday I was going to get off this street. But during this year down there, I would go over to the slave mart. I would sleep under loading docks and box cars. We had a thing called the Wazi Center. I was sharing with Carter today. It was just a place to let you come in out of the snow and cold. And there was no furniture. You just crapped out on the floor. And I would sleep there a day or two, and I would go over and catch a day's work. And I just kept saying, someday I'm going to get off this street. And I still don't realize that alcohol is my problem. You know, I'm just a victim of circumstances. As soon as I can get up into the Capitol Hill area and get a sleeping room and get a little job, it's going to be all right. But I can't do it. I can't get a couple of days' work together. And I would stagger over to the slave mart and get a day's work and go out and work and come back and drink it up and then start over again the next day. And before you know it, a year has practically passed. I walked by, I am sure the club in Denver, the York Street Club, would save my life. I am sure I walked by there to go sell blood. Because from the lower downtown area to the Colorado General Hospital must be a 5-mile walk. And I am sure at several occasions I walked right by the club to go sell blood. And the frustration of going there, over there, I was sharing with Val today, if I was drinking wine, I would normally, when they drop that little blood into that solution, wine, I guess, is good for you. It gives you iron or something, and I'd get my $10, but if I was had been drinking whiskey or beer, sometimes it would just explode. One lady told me it was like foam when she took a sample of my blood. And then I would wallow back and spend that $10. I'll never forget one occasion, though. I asked another wino, I said, snow's coming on, I got holes in the shoes. This is one of the hilarious moments, or one of the funnier moments. God was good in this period of time. He has blacked out, and I've done pages of inventory and tried to recapture what happened in that year's time, but he's blocked a lot of that out. But I do remember one occasion. It was survival. I asked this guy, what do I do? He says, come on, let's go uptown. And we walked up by the Mint, and there's a bowling alley. And I said, now how in the hell are we going in a bowling alley for shoes? And he said, dummy, you got to take your shoes off to bowl. I said, oh, all right. And he says, what size shoe you got? And I says, 12. And he said, oh, man, you got to get a big guy. So we walked through this bowling alley and looked for the biggest guy in the bowling alley, and then got in behind the pair of alleys he was on and looked through the shoes, and I finally slipped into his shoes and left mine. And my feet have been hurting since. I probably walked I don't know how long in a size shoe that didn't fit. But that was just how we survived. The only way I got off of that street, and this man is now in Alcoholics Anonymous, he was going through a divorce, and he was hawking a typewriter on Skid Row. And I was trying to come up the street and avoid him because I seen him and we had gone to high school together. And he said, what the hell's wrong with you, Dick? And I says, I can't get off the street. I've been down here for damn near a year. So he invited me out to his place, and it was a blessing. And he said, you just stay there on the couch. Now, his alcoholism is in full bloom, just like mine. And you get two of them together, and you know you got trouble. And I tried to get my health back. But he had a job at the time, and we were getting drunk. But I'll never forget, it was Easter Sunday, 1973. He had left some money on the dresser, and here was the only guy in several years that had reached out and did anything for me to help me. And he left his money on the dresser, and I snatched it and went to the nearest bar, which was a block away. And in walked a guy that I had been in the penitentiary with, and he said, Dick, this is Easter Sunday. And he said, there's a crap game going on over in Aurora. And he said, let's go up and see if we can't get any action. And I never had been lucky with dice, but that day I hit a streak of luck and won several $100s, and that was like several thousand. And I came down East Colfax. It must be like Jefferson Street, because I guess it goes from one extreme to the other. These bars where I'm at now still have carpets on the floor. And I start down East Colfax drinking with this several $100s that I'd won. And by the time Saturday night rolls around, a week had passed, alcohol for the first time is not working any longer. It's not disguising those fears and anger and terror that I've got inside. And I'm sitting, I've been throwing up blood for several days, and somebody said that if I would drink schnapps and beer, I would get well. A snowshoe, I never drank this before, and it didn't work anyway. And I'm sitting there, and by this time I am just practically back to Skid Row on the Colfax and Pearl. And God, in His anonymity, came into my life. A man who was out doing some research for us, an ex-member of Alcoholics Anonymous, was sitting on a stool next to me. And he said, man, you're in bad shape. If you're throwing up blood like you are for several days, you need help. And he called an ambulance. And I got to the Denver General, and another man entered my life, a very understanding doctor, and he asked when the last time I'd eaten, and I couldn't remember. And he says, how long you been drinking like this? And I said, for 2 years. And a year traveling and a year on skids. And he said, you need help. And he said, I think you're an alcoholic. And up to that point, nobody, police departments, probation departments, nobody seemed to have a solution. And they put me back in the detox ward, and they gave me Thorazine. And I did the Thorazine shuffle for several days, and I didn't like the effect of it. The drinking fountain seemed like miles away, and I just didn't like it, and I wanted out. And the doctor that had seen me that night in the emergency room had asked me if I wanted to go to Fort Logan. Fort Logan was a treatment. If anybody's here tonight, I hope they don't take offense to some of the things I want to say about the treatment center I went to. But it was a government-funded treatment center. The requirement was 72 hours of sobriety to get in it. Now, who in the hell, if I can stay 72 hours sober, I don't need that. I can't make 72 hours. I don't know why they even had such a requirement. And so I asked to be released, and they put me up at the Men's Assistance Center back on Skid Row. I guess every city has a MAC. And it was the type of place that you showered with your shoes on and your money in one hand and your shoes on, because if you put either one down, they'd be gone. You were allowed 3 days. Now, if you let them dunk you and let them save you, you could get another 2 days. And I have been dunked and saved and prayed over because of the advantages that it had. And I said, no, how am I going to make it here? And the only way I could think of making 72 hours of being sober, was to work. And I went over to the Slave Mart, and I have never worked out of a Slave Mart yet that you didn't go cash one of those pay vouchers at a bar. They never set it up with a bank or anything. And I went over, and God, in his anonymity once again, the man that is running this slave mart is another ex-member of alcohol. 2 guys came into my life in a matter of 4 days. 2 guys that had been actively sober at one time who had slipped off. And this guy said, I had worked 2 days, and I would go out of exhaustion back to Mac, and I only had this weekend to get through, and I could get into this treatment center. And I can't make it. He don't have no work for me at Friday night, and the music's coming out of the gin mills, and I've got 3 pay vouchers. All I have to do is walk into this bar and cash them, and I'm off and running. And he said, why don't you try York Street? You know where that's at? And I says, I grew up close to York Street. I know the area. And he says, you get on that bus over there, and you go up, and you check into that Alcoholics Anonymous Club, and they'll help you get through the weekend. And I says, okay, I'll give it a try. And I caught the bus, and I got to the club at approximately 5 o'clock in the evening. If anybody has been to York Street, maybe possibly at the International, it's a big orphanage. I call it an orphanage. Big red stone building on a busy intersection. And I got there at approximately 5:30, and I couldn't go up those stairs. The traffic, I don't know what it was, but I went to the park, of all places, where I had taken my first drink. 22 years have gone by, and here I am back in the park. Now, that park has turned into a gay hangout at this time. And I am sitting over there trying to get up courage to go 2 blocks back to this club. And finally, at dusk, I walked back, got over there, and I got the courage, and I went upstairs, and I checked in at the desk. And it's busy with activity, and she set me down in a chair, and she says, I'll send the man over to talk to you. And she sent a guy over that made me look small, Tom Mill. And Tom, I thought nobody liked Tom, because why is he going to come sit with me? With all these chicks and there's activity going on a Friday night, he came over, and with all things, he brought a 20-question thing and gave me the test and asked me if I would go to a meeting with him. And I said, I'll try it. And my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous was the Kent group. I should have found out what group in Louisville would be compatible with this group. But now this group meets a long ways from downtown at a girls' school. It is where the rich people go. Very few whiskey dents in the cars in that lot. And the Cadillacs and the Rolls Royces are there. And I walked in with clothes that I had been wearing for I don't know how long. Fortunately, they had washed them at the Denver General, but they were wrinkled. The women were in evening dresses, and the men were in suits. There was 2 judges there that had been giving me time on a regular basis. And I walked into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they stuck out their hand, and they offered me tea and coffee. And I looked around, and I said, what the hell is this? There ain't no drunks here. And I waited. The chairman, it was a speaker meeting, and it still meets on every Friday night. It's a social thing in Denver to go to Kent. And the chairman asked if there was anybody there for the first, second, or third meeting, and this guy, Tom, is just nudging me to get up. I don't know if he wants recognition or what, but I ain't going to get up. And about halfway through the meeting, I left. I said, the drunks ain't showed up. There ain't no drunks. These ain't drunks. And thank God there was no streetcar or bus. I had to wait till the meeting was over. And Tom came out and apologized for my first meeting, which he didn't have to do. And on the way, and this is true. And they only gave me 8 colors. 4 are good and 4 are bad. And the odds are that you're going to pick the right colors. And I slept through this finger painting session, and the psychiatrist is shaking me to get up. And I said, what the hell's going on? I woke up swinging. He says, you've got to do the finger painting. And I said, okay. I get down there, and I says, what do you want? And he says, whatever you choose. And I said, okay, I'll do this picture of my life. And I started in the middle like a Picasso. I did a cocktail glass in purple. This is important. purple. And I did effervescent bubbles to illustrate that it was a cocktail. I did a horse's head for gambling. I did a big music clef in black with notes. I put a saxophone, an ace of spades. And I had crowded it all together, and that was a mistake also. And to fill up this page, I did little dots around the outer edge. So within an hour, the three shrinks came in, and they said, "Dick, you're very religious." And I says, "I'm not." And they says, "You are?" And I said, "I'm not." And they said, "That chalice in the very middle of the picture." I knew it was time to get out something. And since it was done in purple, that made it religion. And since I did, they said, "Do you like music?" And I said, "I love music, particularly jazz." And they said, "You hate music." And I said, "I like music." Well, I chose black. And the clincher were all these dots around the page. I think I said that I was terrified of women, very scared of women. I had a very easy sex inventory. I spent 5.5 years in the penitentiary, and when I married this gal that lasted for 12 years, I made a vow to myself I will not cheat. I've been a criminal, and I've been a thief, and I've been a no good all my life, but I'm not going to cheat on her, and I don't think I did unless it was in a blackout. I'm capable of anything in a blackout. But they told me these were affairs that I had had with women. So I don't even know that many. And the greens and blues were happy relationships, and the reds and blacks were bad. And I said, I went out. And I had to sign a release, and I talked to a man who gave me some very sound advice as I left. He said, "You are a capable killer with your hang-up toward law and order." He says, "If you continue to drink, you're going to catch a policeman or some authority figure, and you're going to be in the wrong mood, and you're capable of killing." And I didn't think I was. But he said, "You're not ever going to get sober until you can forget the past, until you can forget the injustices that have been done to you, until you can forget that wife." And this is why I had so much trouble with the fourth step, because I was trying to forget the past, and you people wanted me to remember it. They said, "Where are you going to go?" And I said, "Back to York Street." I am so fortunate that I had been exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous prior to this treatment, because I did have a place to go. And I went back, and they told me, "We push or stress 90 meetings in 90 days." And I wish that was the magic, but I know it isn't, because a lot of you come from little towns that maybe have only one meeting a week. But they told me, "Go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and if you don't like what we've got, hit the door. We don't need you." And thank God they said that, because if they'd have told me I had to go to 90 meetings, I wouldn't be here tonight. They said, "If you don't like it, hit the road." They allowed me that freedom. When I think back of that, I slept on the floor with no desire to get sober. All I'm going to do is get my health back and go back out and do my thing. I didn't even have the third tradition. But I'm going to make a commitment to do these meetings. Now, I remember, this is early May. I remember going to a noon meeting, and they called on me, and I said, "What the hell do you people do New Year's Eve?" That is very important. Very important. What do you do New Year's Eve? And the guy that was chairing the meeting said, "Do you know what month it is?" And I said, "It's May." And he said, "Well, you got a long time to go. If you will stay with us, you will find that we have a party here, a dance, and we really have a good time." Another question, this guy, who has become a dear friend of mine, used to say that he had 5,280 days with no habit-forming cigarettes or a drink. And I used to sit there and try to divide 365, not hear a thing at the meeting, trying to figure out how much time this son of a gun had. And that's the way it was when it started. And I started going to meetings, and somebody got me into a discovery house. And it was in the process of the 90 meetings that I discovered a desire to stay sober. A guy came into my life. We don't talk about sponsorship.
a guy entered my life, a one-legged man from Wichita, a guy named Max R. We encountered each other at a meeting, and he took a liking to me, and very few people up to this point were liking me, because if they mentioned God at a meeting, I would bang on the table and I'd walk out. I couldn't handle it. And Max approached me one night, and he said, asked me where I was staying, and I told him at the Discovery House, and he said, how do you like it? And I said, I don't, because you got to say grace to eat, and I haven't eaten in several days, because I can't handle the grace part. And this man, this guy just loved me to sobriety. He carried me. He got me a sleeping room because he knew I was missing meals just to avoid the grace. He got me a sleeping room at 11th and Clarkson. And he made a project out of me, and he sponsored me, I think, the way they did in the old days. He bought me clothes. He bought me dinner every night for a year. He carried me, and he became my God. I owe my life to this man, and I have two more men, and one of them is here tonight, Gary. I have been blessed with the greatest sponsorship that was available for me. I'll never forget Max. One night it was snowing and blizzard, and he's on his crutches. He can't even get up the stairs at York Street. And he calls the club every evening, and we're going to go eat. And he said, Dick, what are you going to do tonight? And I said, well, Max, I think I'll just stay here and eat at the club and go back to the room. He says, you're not going to go to a meeting? And I said, no. He said, I'll be there in a few minutes to pick you up. And I said, Max, you can't come out in a snowstorm like this. And he said, I'll be there. And the horn beeped, and I looked out, and there he was. This guy had taken bottle caps and pop bottles and nailed them onto the bottom of his crutches. And we drove right up to the door of the gratitude group, the round table group, and he got in. And a friendship I didn't know that could exist started. And some of the greatest meetings I've ever attended was with Max. After the meeting, we'd be in the coffee shop, and I'd ask him a question or so, and he didn't like me to talk at meetings to begin with. And I'll never forget one night we were at the 12 by 12 group, and the meeting had ended, and this is where our gurus go, the spiritual giants in Denver. They meet on Tuesday night. And I go, and I'm not allowed to speak, and I go to the Cherry Creek Inn coffee shop afterwards. And things are happening now. I've possibly got 8 or 9 months of sobriety, and I've got the first step down. But I said, Max, why is it invariably I go to a meeting, and the chairman asks, does anybody have anything to say? And I've got a bothering them, and I've got 2 or 3 things that are just eating me alive that I'm afraid to ask. Why is it that invariably I get my answer? And he said, do you think possibly God is talking through people? And I'm having problems with the God thing, and I said, hey, that makes sense. And I'm going to read something from the big book. He said, why don't you go home tonight, the sleeping room, and get that big book of yours out and turn to page 55. And he says, I think you're going to find a start that possibly you can start with to find this God. And I'd like to share this because I can't remember it. And to me, this is where it all started for me. And it says, we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup just as much as the feelings we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. And I said, wow, there it is. That's why I'm getting my answers. So I'm going to use the group. I had a first step as soon as I got my answers about why can't I have a couple of drinks. Today I feel that the first step is to admit, accept, adjust, and acknowledge, and I could spend an hour talking about the adjusting and acknowledging. A lot of old-timers don't like the acceptance part, but it's in the book. Concede to I don't know self. If that is an acceptance, I don't know what. The second step, I came to believe in the group, because the group was now keeping me sober. I was staying sober on fear in the fellowship, and people were telling me it wouldn't work, that I was going to have to find a God. But a year had passed, and I was using the power of the group. It was stressed to me very importantly that lack of power was my dilemma. I was powerless over people, places, and things. And I looked at that and realized that I did a lot of drinking because of that lack of power. But this group, this insanity that I kind of speak of, I shared with some people this afternoon. I had my own concept of this, and I'm not going to confuse anybody with it, but when I get to thinking of a drink, this is the insanity they're referring to in the second step. And I had an old-timer in St. Louis get the book out and show me about the jaywalker. And back home at a second step meeting, a lot of people talk about the crazy things they do while they're drinking. That isn't what the step was meant. It was the thinking of the drink. That is the insanity of alcoholism. I came to believe in the group, and the group was keeping me, and I still got the compulsion. And I fought it for a year and a half. But finally one night, after about a year of being miserable, going to meetings and trying to stay sober, for the first time in the sleeping room, I'm going to get drunk. I can't handle this compulsion no more. And I had to find this God. And as a kid, I had a God in the sky that I would go eat a hamburger on Friday and he'd zap me. And I would do this and do that and he'd zap me. When I talk at a lot of high school, they have the same punishing concept of God. And I knew I couldn't handle that. But I cried out in desperation in the sleepy room. I said, God, I don't believe in you, but you've got to help me. And I wish I had a Bill W. experience, but what happened, I went into a peaceful sleep, and something did happen. I went to the club. Somebody came up and said, Dick, did you take the third step? And I said, yeah, but don't tell nobody. I was still fighting and holy surrender. Defiant is the 12 by 12 calls it. And I finally quit the defiant and started relying. And then they told me I had to go into that fourth step. And everywhere I went, and by this time the one-legged man has left, and Gary entered my life, who spoke here a couple of years ago. And Gary was running with the step workers and going to step workshops, and I started getting involved. And they were telling me I was step. Well, I was terrified of the fourth step. So I threw everything. I knew they didn't do the fourth step. I went to St. Louis. And the very first meeting in St. Louis was on the fourth step. And another man entered my life for a short period of time there, and we were talking about work record, and he said, list your last 10 jobs and do just take the 3 columns just like the big book shows. And I did it. And he says, see, you can't hardly do a fearless moral inventory when you're in fear. It's almost impossible. And I wrote the writing, and I put down everything that I could possibly think of. And I took it to this guy that had broke the ice for me, and if I could do a 5th step with him. And this was the greatest experience I've ever had in this program. And I went to his home, and he had run off his Al-Anon wife and put a fire in the fireplace, and it was in November. And he looked at my notebook, and he said, who are you, Sinclair Lewis? And I said, what is all this drama and crap? Over the fireplace and just pitching. And he said, let's sit on, and he started unloading on me. But he broke the ice, and we started going on a gut level. And what happened about 3.5 hours later, this man in front of me just starts crying, bawling, and I can't handle it. And I shared with you I haven't cried. I never cried in my beer. I shut that emotion off, and I would not. It was a sign of weakness. The macho thing would not let me cry. And he said, go ahead. And I cried, and I got free. For the first time in my life, the walls of the penitentiary had been torn down, and all the things that I had done that I thought were so horrendous. The things that you take to your grave were gone. And it was a tremendous experience. Somebody told me that it was probably a cleansing of the soul, and I liked that, because we just both cried like babies. And he knew I was miserable in St. Louis, and he said, "Get in your car and get on with the program. Everything was all right." And I needed to hear that. I threw everything in the car, and he said, "Go back and make amends to that wife and children." And we got on our knees and did the 7-step prayer. He had a little type card ready for me, and we got on our knees and did that. And I got back to Denver, and about this time, my wife today came into my life. And Gary was still in town, and I had already looked at, I became willing to get rid of my character defects. I had never been able to recapture that feeling that I had in this man's front room. Shortcomings, I have a concept of shortcomings that I don't hear anything about anywhere else. And I'm going to share it with you, and I hope I don't screw you up. I went out to a meeting in Green Mountain, and we had a man there with a lot of sobriety from California. And I said, "What is his shortcoming? It's nothing in the book. I've looked at 12 by 12. The 12 by 12 says it's a character defect. It's a character defect. They wouldn't have made that step." And the guy says, "Well, what we do in Southern California, a shortcoming is where you come up short." And we're meeting in this stag group in this man's home. He says, "Have you ever got out of your car after the meeting and you're on your way home and you say to yourself, you should have stayed and emptied the ashtrays or helped put his house? If that guilt, that twinge of guilt hits you on your way home, you've come up short." And he says, "Everybody's shortcomings are going to be different." He said, "How many times have you been in your home and your wife don't feel well and you know you should go over and possibly help with wash with and you don't. You go out the door and you go to a meeting and you come up short." And he says, "You know what? Those shortcomings will lead to a character defect. And if they go into a character defect, you could possibly drink." So I lead to the short version. I do this in my deep prayer and work. And thank God for Gary, because I went out and I bought every self-help book imaginable. I bought I'm Okay, You're Okay, Shifting Gears, and I am going to go changing my life. I know my character defects, I know where I'm coming up short, and I'm going to do it with books. And I set out for a year and a half and went to my meetings where I read every book that I could, and I wasn't getting any better. I called Gary in desperation one night and I said, "I'm still angry, I am miserable. What am I missing in Alcoholics Anonymous?" He said, "Dick," he says, "you've missed the whole thing. You've got to go to work with it. You've got to pray to have these character defects and shortcomings." And it completely had eluded me. And this was about 3.5, 4 years ago. I started praying to have the anger and these things removed. And you know, it works. I don't care how many self-help books I bought, they just didn't seem to work. The positive thinking thing worked for 90 days, and then it left me down flatter in hell. The TM, I went out and got a mantra. I even joined this thing. It would work for a while, but then it would let me down. And it was... Gary doesn't realize when it was just, I called him on the phone, and he shared with me. And by this time, my folks' alcoholism, and I call Gary the Rock. He was the best man at our wedding. But my mother tried to commit suicide because my dad had started drinking. And I'll never forget this. I think Gary showed up at the hospital quicker than I did. And I have a man now in my life who's at home now, who's our delegate to New York, Don P. He was my sponsor, and he's helped me tremendously. But I made a list of the people that I had on the men to make. I went out, and I have got 3 warrants out for my arrest in the 3.5 years of sobriety. And it is very uncomfortable trying to go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and worrying about who's behind you. And I went to an attorney at York Street, and I got a boy playing football, and I owe a lot of money in back child support. Most of York Street did. Every time a cop in the program walked in the door, they all went out the back. People worked in the program. But I went to him and I said, how do I do this? And he says, you go out to that district attorney in that county and you turn yourself in. And if he wants to send you back to the penitentiary, you go back. And thank God I did, because I got to watch my boy play football. I didn't have to sneak in the back gate. I got to sit there proud and dignified and watch the kid perform. And I made amends to the wife. I do feel that this is a step that you, if you're a blackout drinker like me, you may never complete it. And the way I found that out, I owed a little family $10. And I was washing dishes at York Street, and I went out to pay her, and the guy at the end of the bar said, hey, USB, you owe me $5. And I said, you ain't on my list. And he said, what list? I didn't know, and I have on several occasions. The key there is to be willing, because some people might pop up in my life that are on my list, and I better be willing to handle it when the time comes. So I ask in a daily prayer to keep me willing to make these amends. And as far as the 10th step, I've had problems with it. It seems like when my program is going well is when I'm practicing the 10th step. The discipline isn't there, but I found a shortcut in the 12x12. I was the shop steward on the job, and I loved my lack of power. I was still searching for it. And I was the guy that would represent the people in the local in our union. And I don't know how many times I've had to go to my supervisor in the last 2 years and say, I got to make an amend. And he got tired of seeing me. So finally, I picked up the 12x12 one time, and it said in there a suggestion of maybe doing a spot check. So what I do now, to make it simple for me, I work a graveyard shift in a grocery warehouse. Every 2 hours we're allowed a break on company rules. And what I have done to simplify it, every 2 hours I say to myself, now where have I gone wrong? Where have I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking? And that has helped me tremendously. It has made it simpler for me. Upon awakening, I heard a guy named Max C. from Canada who was at Cedar Glen. And he shared a story about how you can screw up your day before you only take 2 or 3 steps across the bedroom floor. And he said this about upon awakening, and it's in the book. Upon awakening, not after I get a cup of coffee or take a leak. As soon as my eyes awaken, let's get right with the Lord. Let's do some prayer. And I started practicing that 2 years ago after he had talked at Cedar Glen, and that thing is working in my life now. Last year I had a guy getting into the prayer and meditation. I heard a man, Bob W. from Lake Whitney, talk about practicing the principles in all our prayers. And I've had problems with that. But he said the way he started 12, 14 years ago was to take one principle a day, possibly love today, and try to go through the whole day practicing this one principle. And what will happen as you start doing this, it will just become automatic. Now, a lot of times, Janie don't know what the hell I'm practicing that day. Patience or whatever. But I started doing this a year ago. And I started on the graveyard shift at sometime during the night. The guys think, because of my age, they're all youngsters and they're all using drugs to do this type of work. I go off into the corner and I meditate. And they think I'm sleeping, and I usually crawl up in a box of brooms or a skid of cigarettes or whatever's available. And they all go to the lunchroom and they all shut their radios down. And I get 20 minutes of just getting quiet. And I get choked up every time I think of this man. He saved my life. He really did. But How It Works, it's called. And if, like I was saying, if there's anybody new that is trying to follow this path, and it's a son of a gun, it'll work, you know. And I just kept going and going, and suddenly something happened, and I wanted this damn thing called sobriety. But it goes with it like this, and I'll shut down, and like I said, it's not counsel approved. You might not like it, I don't care. In each of you I see a friend, one whose friendship knows no end. And so just for today, I'll try to be to others what you are to me. You stopped and turned and took me by the hand and steadied me until I could stand. And then until I walked alone, let go my fingers one by one. You did not say to me, do this, be thus. You said quite simply, walk with us. I tried, and when I lifted up my eyes, could see the same vision which had made you free. We walk together now, a pleasant band, which waits for me if I extend my hand. With the trembling fingers of one whose spirit must also break or bend, and teach him softly what it means to have and be a friend. Just for today, I will let others see what each of you has done for me. Thank you.